Fayam. Good afternoon, and thank you for making time to join us. Welcome, everybody. It's time for us to have our Talk CRE monthly seminar series, and for June, I'm really excited to have organized this and to have come into contact with Emily and Rachel several times planning for this to happen. So I'm really happy that it's happening today. For those of you joining, my name's Dr. Isabella Gatti, and I'm joining from Larakia land. I pay my respects to all Larakia people and the elders that are past and present. And I also extend that respect to all First Nations people who are joining us today. I just want to acknowledge that we are having Emily and Rachel present on intercultural communication, which is like really important for the work that we do here at the Molly Institute, but also the work that we do with our partners and with allies who are trying to improve maternal and neonatal outcomes for First Nations people. If you have any questions, kindly put them in the chat box and I'll try to read the questions, and we'll do this at the end of the presentation. And I'm really excited, but I don't want to take the wind out of the sails. So I'm going to hand over to Emily and Rachel to introduce themselves, and they're going to tell us what they're coming to speak to us about on this important topic. And so, Emily and Rachel, over to you, and I hope we have a wonderful session.
Thanks, Isabella. So we're just going to share our screen with a PowerPoint thing. Hopefully you can still see us on the side. Is that working? Yep. Okay. Come on, ready? All right, so our presentation today is called Räl-manapanmirr djämaw, which means working collaboratively. Well, it can mean a few different things, a few different translations, right? Yeah. So we've prepared this together, but we want to begin. I'm going to just shrink you so we can see. We want to begin by acknowledging that we're on Larakia land today, and we acknowledge the elders past and present. And we also acknowledge Molly Wadaguga, who's there in the picture and who's been a trailblazer and leader and motivator for the work of the institute that I'm now part of, and which Dikul has worked with too. And in particular, I also like to acknowledge senior Yolngu people who've worked with Dikul and I on lots of projects, but the one we're talking about today is my doctoral research project, which we did collaboratively over the last 5 or so years with lots of senior Yolngu from Gullywinkle. So we'd like to acknowledge the elders there as well.
I'd like to acknowledge in Yolngu acknowledging djämaw mala nguni walal na kundual research involved djämaw ka tuan yang alinga nawi wangadipong Molly Research Center ka bolo acknowledging tual na wali kadial djämaw nakun kapalanya.
Okay. So the first thing we want to do is tell you who we are. And this is also one of our key messages for the seminar today about the importance of knowing who each other are. So you want to go first? Or?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dikul or Rachel. Mostly people call me Dikul in the Yolngu communities. I'm a Jambarapuyungu Yolngu. My first language is Jambarapuyungu. My clan is Jambarapuyungu. My moiety is Kalikali, and I'm from, skin name is Kalikali, and I'm from the Dua moiety. I'm also the language manager at the Aboriginal Resource Development Services, looking after all the languages in Northeast Annam region.
Yeah. And a researcher.
And a researcher.
For that. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Emily Armstrong, and I am a non-Indigenous researcher. My family comes from settler and colonial and convict background in Australia, and I grew up in Gamilaroi land in New South Wales, in Tamworth, so my close family is still there. I'm a daughter and a sister, an auntie now to 2 little boys, and still a granddaughter. I have a 95-year-old grandparent, and I just lost my nan recently. I moved to Darwin and the Northern Territory, and then out to Gullywinkle to join a team who I think are amazing, and I've learned so much working with, and some of them are here on the screen. You can see the supervisors and co-researchers for my PhD djämaw. Supervised by Professor Räl-manapanmirr, who's contributed a video and lots of things for us today, and Anne Lowell, who I think is online. Thanks, Anne. And co-researchers there on the bottom, we've got videos from Yungaringa and Gapang today to share with you, as they can't be with us. And Dr. Sarah Island, who you know from the Molly-Wadaguga Institute, and I think Lynn's online too. Thanks, Lynn. Lynn's an early childhood educator. So yeah, I'm also a speech pathologist, and I came to this area of research because of my intercultural experiences. It made me really interested in learning about different ways that we can bring knowledges together and different skills that we need to learn about from cultural and authoritative knowledges that might help us to work together better and understand children and families. Yeah, so I just finished my PhD last year. Started in my postdoc role, which is why I'm presenting today. Ma, is that enough?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about these ladies? Okay. Yes, so the researchers on the screen were with us throughout the whole project, and agreed to have some of their quotes and videos shared today to help with this seminar. Okay. So our research was conducted in Gullywinkle, which, do you want to say something about Gullywinkle?
Yeah, Gullywinkle is situated in northeast Arnhem Land. There are many groups living in the community. Most Yolngu living there, they belong to own clan group homelands. So Gullywinkle community is a mixture of languages and a mixture of different clan groups. It was established by Papa Sheppy a long time ago. People moved in from homelands and settled in the community of Gullywinkle. Gullywinkle belongs to a few different clan groups there.
Yeah. And their population in Gullywinkle is officially over 2,000, sometimes many more. People move around a bit. And 95% of people on the census are Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people, mostly Yolngu. One of the reasons that we decided to do the research in Gullywinkle, well, there's 2 main ones. One is that there's a really strong history of Yolngu-led and collaborative intercultural research on the island. And the other one is that this project was exploring intercultural communication between families and service providers. And with a population of 2,500 people, there are 23 different services based on the island aiming to support young children and their families. And that's not including a lot of fly-in, fly-out services. So it's a really busy place, for service providers, and a really vibrant and complex place for that communication between cultures. So that has brought a lot of experience and knowledge, which we were able to include in the research. Can you see all the pictures on the screen, or have you got my little Zoom box covering them? It's okay? Thanks, Jess. It's nodding. Great. Ma. Oh.
Yeah, so this one here, working together, cultural interface, is bringing together the understanding from Yolngu communication and Balanda non-Yolngu communication, and finding a shared safe space where both understandings come together so that we can work together. So a lot of the through this research has been done to understand the djämaw processes and how djämaw communicate in certain ways so that it's brought into integrate into Balanda world, so that having the importance of a dialogue in a safe, culturally safe space. So the main story for this to share is finding the middle space so that we can all work together.
Yeah, and we based this concept, which is underneath our whole approach. It's so in the literature, it's sometimes called the cultural interface. It comes from Nakata. And there's some really interesting things. I'll put a few references up for people who haven't explored that cultural interface as much yet. But it's called a multi-layered and multi-dimensional space of dynamic relations. That's what Nakata calls it. And Laurapa Mapalami, you can see her hands there in the middle with mine, swapping a book for a painting. But she always talks about it as reaching into each world to bring things into the middle, so that each person involved is still standing in their own identity and respecting those different knowledges, different identities that people bring, but then we're co-creating something in the middle together. And so it's a really dynamic and challenging space, not always safe, but we have to navigate that together to change it and work out a way that it can be safe. And the quote I put on the screen is one I really like, because it reminds us that it's also about realizing the conceptual limits of our own thinking. And that brings challenges and also makes this area so fascinating to learn about different ways of thinking and realize it makes us stronger in realizing what our own ways of knowing, being, and doing are at the same time.
Just to add to that, Wako, other thing is it's also about listening, how we receive information and how we are hearing the information being received. So that interface in the middle is not only for giving, but also how we receive it as well.
Yeah. And I should explain why Dikul's calling me Wako. I forgot about my adoption at the introduction. So what I was going to say is that when I first went to Gullywinkle on the first day, I met family, including Maria Guruliwi, who's my adopted Ngandi. So my young mother, she adopted me as her daughter. And then through that, now I have a wonderful and very supportive family there who I've learnt so much with. And through that kinship network, I call Dikul Ngandi, which means mother, and she's calling me Wako, which means child. Ma. Okay, so we're going to discuss a bit more about how we worked at this cultural interface to collaborate and what worked and succeeded in this project. This will just be 1 minute. I'll just tell you a bit more about the doctoral research. So it was working with Yolngu families, service providers, both Yolngu and Balanda, which is a Yolngu word for non-Indigenous, and also researchers, Yolngu and Balanda, all working together. The project had 2 phases. So first we explored intercultural communication, specifically during assessments of children's development. And we used methods we're going to tell you about called Räl-manapanmirr, Räl-manapanmirr, and video reflexive ethnography to do that. So we gathered a lot of different perspectives and djämaw stories about what helps and supports in that space of coming together at a cultural interface for an assessment of a child's development. And then we analysed that collaboratively. Dikul and I did a lot of that part together and came up with a Yolngu metaphor for sharing the findings. And the second phase was about co-creating resources that people, Yolngu and Balanda, can use to facilitate and support their intercultural communication. And we did that co-creation through participatory action research. So the pictures on the screen show some of us in action doing those steps. But if you want to learn more about the findings, you can find them online. One way is through my researcher profile through CDU. And we're not going to share the findings in detail today because of that requires quite a lot of unpacking. And we do that in a workshop that's at least half a day to really understand the metaphor and the layers. There are some publications, and what we decided to share today was some of the things we found out about the process of doing the research together. So the tukkar, the pathway, yeah, for how we got there. Okay. And this is the steps in the pathway that we want to share today. You want to read them?
So this one, darangan miri kaja kan malangoy numa balarali yun miri.
We'll just name them all now and then we'll go into each in turn so you know what's coming.
Milk kung yul ni wangana miri balarali yun miri. Nalchando milk kung mayali uni tudi dao maratuyul ngoy darangan dao bukulungan maramortang wal marito kangura yurana oy. Rungi kamala jare yur kayur na djämaw miriang.
Thanks. Yeah, understanding and looking after each other and showing who you are. And those two, we've published an article in this Learning Communities Journal here, which is published through the Northern Institute, which explores those in more detail as well, if you want to look that up after today. And then the last 4, back and forth discussion, how we show the roots of the story so that people can understand. Recognizing ownership of stories and sharing with agreement and permission, and go back, check and put the findings into practice. Those ones I wrote about in one of the chapters in my thesis, which is actually called methodological findings. It's about that. So yeah, I can give you those references at the end if you want to learn more. So we're going to start by unpacking Darangan-mirr Gajaga Numalangoy Nam Numabular Balaralion-mirr, sorry. And we'll do that beginning with a video from Laurupa. So if you can't hear this, somebody yell out so we can make sure the sound's working.
Ang ulingal itong ni Darangan-mirr na licarang aja kali licarang goy ngale. Palanya ngurana kon kam ngatangal turang bangi luka kurupan miralimut to. Kuyangan mirangal to kuruton. Na ngale wanang ngale yul ngale. Munan licarang goy ngale to nama jarkren. Wanang ngal to kadara. Muni pingurin ngal to kanamay. Ebiyan parang alto bicara kami ya terang nangai guna kako maricin nenen alilokan ngataran bani nguran maricin tahun kurupan main makna nenen nguran yen rom do kajakre
So we're going to talk about that picture as an example.
This picture here shows you almost sitting together, spending time with one another. In the pot, there's a turtle cooking there. It looks like they are not doing any work, but part of doing project work or consultation in communities, this is a process of making a project better. It's seen differently because people may worry for things like, oh, my boss will tell me off because I'm sitting around doing nothing. But in a community perspective, what they are doing there is part of a process to make a project better. So there are 2 different perspectives on that. So to sort of understand those things as part of a project is important part to make your project or research better.
Yeah. So one of the important differences that we wanted to talk about with this idea of understanding and looking after each other is that it's about our bodies, our minds, and our spirit and our everyday living connecting up, and it's not that separation between professional and personal. It's quite different in that they overlap and they interweave with each other. So some of the practical things that I learned when I was doing my PhD were about ways of doing that, like ways of finding process in Gullywinkle that could work with people for finding a comfortable space to meet and sit down together, which was often ideally something like that in the picture. Finding shared food that everyone wanted to have. And if you had miapunu, there would be lots of people around if there was turtle cooking. Yeah. Making sure that we had transport for people. All these are really big priorities to start with. So being able to pick people up and not only the logistics, but starting off by asking people how they're feeling and really listening to the answer and being able to prioritize making sure everyone's ready, you know, and sometimes that would include making sure people had had some food and that their kids had had some food, because you can't concentrate if you're worrying about that, or helping with some employment paperwork or sorting out another family issue before everyone felt ready to work. And we also found that sometimes we all just needed to be together, like Laura said, to rest together, and that would really build and keep our relationships strong. And sometimes we would get really into it, and even though we hadn't had dinner and it was 9 o'clock at night, we all wanted to keep going because of that momentum and that relationship. So yeah, one of the things we found is that the best plan is planning to be responsive. So when you're doing your planning for what you're going to achieve on field work, if I wrote down a list of what I was going to do, usually that list wouldn't get done until then at the end I'd realized that we achieved way more and different things than I was expecting. So trying to keep, that's what you said, wasn't it? Let that collaborative process take its own dukka, its own pathway. Yeah. Anything else? That bits, and you were talking earlier about it not having a bits and pieces approach.
So most, because I've grown up in the community and understand why these kinds of things are happening, sometimes it's seen differently from the Balanda perspective. What is happening here in this picture is a practice, a beginning practice of process, 2 different processes and how they work together at the start, even though they are sitting around cooking lovely turtle there. But it's a form of process practicing before the actual research and work starts.
And it helps make it holistic, right?
Yeah.
Bring it into a holistic framework.
Yeah.
So when we were preparing, we were talking about examples of the challenges that come up, because we're all working within systems, Yolngu systems and Balanda systems, and sometimes they clash. They don't fit together easily. Like Dikul and I were talking about following Yolngu Rom law and process and the steps of the pathway, and then also having Balanda budgeting and timelines and project outlines and KPIs.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at things. For example, there is a certain way we speak or interact with the community because of the way a project is designed, or for example, a funding has a requirement. So when we are following a funding requirement or meeting a KPI, those things can make a person look differently to a community because of the project design has already been done and hasn't been collaborated with the local community people. So sometimes we have deadlines or we have to do a certain work in certain ways that can actually impact in the way people see us in the community. So that's why it's very important to find this middle space, to talk to one another, to understand how we can design even a research or a projects together.
Yeah, and we were saying that we need to find that space early for the planning, but also all the way through and still now. Like, it's not like we figured out how to do it forever. We're going to be lifelong learning, and having that safe space to come back and bring up those issues when people get in difficult situations or get put in a role that's not culturally safe, that we can come back and raise that with our colleagues and reflect together. It's been really helpful. Hey?
So it's also minimizes certain risks that may pop up in the community during research. So having that safe shared understanding is very important. We call that Pāmara. Pāmara means working with a Yolngu person from a community to be like your guide, whether it's for a research or to make your research culturally safe, or to even direct on how to shape your work within the community. So Pāmara is the word for a cultural safety or for project or research.
Okay, the next we're going to hear from Gobbang talking about Milkongyomi, showing who you are.
If you're doing a project or stories, don't just give that person what you think or what you're expecting. Get to know that person first. Doon to sharing daw. Kalakam na malang daw. Para niya nakunong dayo ngo limerjal djämaw. O djämaw limerong kalto. Ya kan goropol djämaw. Magitin na ngorongon. Daw kay orang nyanyi. Mario ngomere piak. Rali meriang yol ngoni. Ya katuna na kon ngai. Djämaw bele ule pungai ngoni yutta yol ngo. Ngati le ngoy ngai ka. Ya kan ngon dalangan ngoni na le merto djämaw. Yo, magitin na tunan ngo mangai na tinya ngai. Nangay ba puro nangay mala nangan modaro nangoy ngai palanya. Get to know them, talk about things that they know, and it will help. How can we connect together, go work together? And it's a good thing to get to know that person first before we hand out any work for that people or that person.
Yolni.
Ngaran dali ako gapan gumbola gabalan daya ako ngaradore thing, but ngara kajal tere nito ngaran lakaram gapan. Bapororako gupapo yung dai goro kay kamango kumbola surname jangara likan jangara kay kamango kumbola ka darok jarako gupapo yung dai goro ngara mine ngara lika galewen ko po yung ngara ka bay ngora kawanga ko pa po yung ngara ka jambar po yung ka rale ngara marchida wenel bilera kalanga banga baito para kaminan doal yoro kalki ngara tero ngera tore da ko mekito merikin ya treatment ke blatera rongen.
Yeah, so that one, when I listen to Kappan speaking, in the Yolngu perspective, when someone is introducing themselves, they are not only introducing themselves as a person, but they are introducing a Yolngu system. So we see a person coming into communities as a system as well, not as a person. So that's why it's important to get to know someone, because you are going to learn about the system through that individual. So she mentioned her surname, her ringage, her group, her clan group. So those are references to her clan group within her clan's system. So each Yolngu, their names are named after a system actually. So when Gappan is talking about herself, she's talking about herself as a system. So when you get to know a Yolngu person, you are starting to learn the Yolngu system.
Yeah, and that's what we were just saying before, that it would be really nice if Balanda would introduce themselves so that Yolngu will know a bit more about the system that we're bringing to an interaction and to a community as well. So it is the personal things, but it's also more about your background and your experience and your intentions with coming to meet with Yolngu for a project.
Yeah, I was talking to Wakwemali before we came here about that topic where you all are very open to sharing about anything really, and we actually do find it a bit difficult to learn about non-Yolngu people because we see that as a closed off. But we would like to know a bit more about Balanda, because once we learn more about Balanda, we actually, the project is more better than the project outcomes, or the data collection, or the quality of the research is much, much better.
Yeah, and when people know each other, then they can connect. So that's the key point from our research, is that people need to know and recognize each other first before they can try and connect their knowledge systems. And we actually found, I said we weren't sharing too many findings, but this is an important one, that we found that Yolngu are much better at this than Balanda, and that we have a lot to learn as non-Indigenous researchers from Yolngu who we're working with about how to do it well. Especially if you think about our research processes in university systems and how often it's an assumption that you're non-Indigenous unless stated otherwise in this space, and people putting their identity on things like articles or stating it at the beginning of a conference presentation can be really valuable, because it acknowledges that we all see through our own cultural lenses and we're all bringing those perspectives to our research. There's no one assumed position. Okay. Now Yungering is going to talk about the third one, which is Räl-manapanmirr, Räl-manapanmirr, back and forth discussion. Just before she speaks, I'm going to tell you she's speaking Waramiri, which is her own language, which Dikul also understands. And you can read the text on the screen so you understand what she's saying.
Yo banyabaying Yolngu yo kuyo kamlale o ngapake yo nan goay nan goyanginyi naya kabanya yango ya jura nganungura ngapake ora ka yakanan baying banya manapan ma banya Yolngu lem nurkunga jaul na pilin nan baying banya barko yen yual ma una jurang ayaka wari pungoy kariyun kanunung aro Yolngu yo yakan darangan banyaya ya jango pili nurko ka jurang pada kabar ko walin kananam jalma nunung apaki ka Yolngu kuyo kang nurko rale rambangi koa kamalang tumangacil malang tumadangang nyini ya kariyun mia warat toa palanan ngaro jamam nunggu yualkin malangton palaku nggak yuna pilanya.
Oh, I'll just say about this point before we move forward is it's a really big point, this one, because usually most of the methodologies that might be in other literature might come with question and answer formats or pre-planned interview outlines. And Yongringa, as you can hear in her voice, she's very passionate with teaching me about not bringing my ideas in a question, because when you bring that question, you're open to hearing an answer that matches your question. And we need to be open to hearing what people want to share on this topic and say that might not match the idea that's already in my head. And I learned some really valuable lessons about that early in my research. I can tell you a longer story later if someone's interested, but because we were using video reflexive ethnography, a lot of my early interactions were videoed. And so sometimes I didn't understand what people were saying to me, because I was expecting to hear one kind of story and they were telling me a really different one. But by watching back those videos over time, as I learned more, I understood more and started to be able to unpack the real importance to the topic of what people were saying. It's about listening, sitting with your uncertainty while you listen. Receiving the story.
Yeah, so receiving the story is also important, as well as giving, because in the community there are different clan groups, and the way that the receiving the story is, for example, put into different filtering systems, so per the clan group, so it's not received the same. So just because Yolngu people are living in one community, it doesn't mean that the receiving of the story is all the same. So just to keep that in the back of the mind, that receiving of stories are different to each clan group, each language, and per the age group as well.
Yeah, and people need to be able to, it's really important to budget and allow time for people to speak in their own language.
Yeah, that's also very important, because we as second language speakers, when we speak in English, the meaning of the story gets lost, because sometimes we can't find words that we can only use in the Yolngu language. So for a best good quality data collection in research is done in own languages. So then that can be put into English carefully without losing the content value of the story.
And we picked this picture, which was a story that Dikul told to her sister, who then put it into a painting, because we'll come back to it, but just this idea that if you look at that painting, you'll try to interpret it through what you know now, but over time, what you know about this story will change. So it's like seeing with different eyeglasses, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just encourage everyone to look through anything you're writing that look for that phrase, the community, because it's kind of a non-existent thing in some ways. So trying to be more specific about who, because participants need to know who they're speaking to and who they're speaking for as well. Yeah. Well, we better hurry up. You've only got 10 more minutes. Mark, how we show the roots of the story so that people can understand. I think I was trying to read your quote out. The research team understand that the way water flows through Yolngu lands and seas is a process embedded in law, and that English word metaphor is not strong enough to express Yolngu understandings of connections between people, water, knowledge, and communication. So when you see this video, hopefully it makes you feel something. But we use this video as part of our presentation of research findings through water stories, Kapulta, where we share the research findings about intercultural communication. And we talk about metaphor, but we need to acknowledge the limitations of that word. So what you see would be very different to what a Yolngu elder might see when they see this water and this place. And how we connect to the metaphor depends on our identity, our relationships, our connections to the place, the knowledges and experiences that we come with. That's something Gopbang really emphasizes when talking about metaphor. Yeah. So metaphors, the metaphors you find in Yolngu research are really powerful ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
Or do you want to say some more about metaphor?
Billy is covering.
Really. What about the layers?
So the metaphors, because of our languages, we find challenge in communicating in English. Metaphor is the easiest way for us to help you to help us, and vice versa. So a lot of your elders share stories by using metaphors, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a metaphor. It can, it has many contexts and many meanings, and it's pretty broad. But depending on the project or the research, it can be narrowed down to the specific topic. So metaphors are a good way to share and start a dialogue with the elders in the communities.
So one of the things in the second phase of the research, we were co-creating all these resources using images and videos. And the picture you can see on the screen is during COVID lockdowns, where I was in Tamworth with my family, and that's Gopbang and Laurupa in Darwin, and Anne had helped them with the technology to get online. And I was sharing a picture, that one you can see on the screen, thinking, oh, wow, this is a beautiful picture I took from the plane of salt water meeting fresh water. We could use this. And then Gopbang and Laurupa talked for an hour or so about all sorts of layers to that picture, which I had no idea when I shared it, but it turned out to be an ideal picture. But it has stories about whose land it was, how they were personally connected to that clan through that systems that Dikul mentioned earlier, people who'd passed away that they were remembering who'd been to that place or who owned that place. Songlines and stories related to that specific place, and then also how our research findings might link to that image and which concepts it could represent. So as Balanda, it's really an amazing learning experience, but also really important to keep remembering that even though people are sharing a metaphor connected to deep knowledge systems, that we're only understanding a layer of it, and that's going to connect to people in different ways. Like one time we put a picture like that up at a conference, and an old man started crying because it reminded him of his brother, and his funeral had been recently. So these layers are really deep and interconnected, and we have to respect that we'll only ever understand certain levels, and even fewer levels can be shared in an online forum like this one. Yeah. Which brings us to the next point. Dau pukurangamram watangowal I can't read the screen. Maduga ngora yuranaway.
Yeah, so that's saying taking back the Dao, the stories, to who it was originally, given by, just to check things, make sure everything is okay, and what they gave permission for is the same and it hasn't changed. So basically just checking, and part of a consent as well. And also having, making sure that the story is understood by both Yolngu and Balanda, and then it's not written up and then it's sort of turned into something else. So that's a very important part of research as well.
Yeah, we don't have enough time left to go into the details, but in Yolngu systems, there's really complex laws about IP, Yolngu intellectual property, and laws and processes that need to be followed with watangu, which are owners, and then jungaya, who are caretakers, and this system of knowing who are the right people to talk to about the right things. So it's really important to keep that collaboration with the experienced Yolngu researchers going throughout a project, so that can be checked with informed consent all the way through.
Yeah.
But-
One example, what I'll just add to that is in the Balanda world, you get a consent form from an individual, whereas in a Yolmo consent, even though you're working with an individual, they actually have to get a consent from a group of people before the individual signs the consent. So that's to keep in mind as well.
And that consent doesn't mean you can share it for anything, it has to be for the purpose discussed, right?
Yeah.
If you want me to tell you details of stories later, because we're nearly out of time, but this was just one example where we also needed to get permission, not just for sharing stories or recordings, but also for images of places. So you can see on the bottom of this screen, this is from a video. We've got permission of Oscar, who was a Jungaya, for the area where this was filmed. He's a caretaker. And so Yungering and I spent a couple of hours with him, showing him the resources we'd developed, talking about their purpose, who they were for and why. And then he added to them the resources and gave permission to use that place to represent that story.
Yeah.
So something to consider if you're using images and videos filmed on Yolngu land, but we're all on First Nations land. So our last point, oh, we might skip that one.
Yeah, skip.
If you want to explore weaving more, you should have a look at Dikul's Australian Woven Connections Facebook page. There's a lot of layers and depth to weaving. My last point.
Yeah. Rungi ka malajar yur na
Djämaw.
go back check put findings la.
Yeah. So there's a really strong Yolngu literature base for the importance of integrating action into the research process. And I encourage people to have a look at the work done through Yalu Mangit Nyaru over years, including videos from Laurupa, publications with Anne Lowell and Laurupa and the bigger team. But that was a big part of our planning and our process, was to make sure that we took the findings back to the people who would be able to use them on their intercultural communication. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're nearly out of time, aren't we, Isabella? So, yeah, can we finish with a video from Yungeringa? You want to finish with that? Yungeringa's got a minute video here that just summarizes and finishes beautifully, saying about what we did, why we did it, and most especially how we did this research.
And this is the way that going to work through best for us, Pukma Kungal Malingo. Yo, ka pulunungo tawo, kalit nungo, panyangalia ka manapanmirr nurko yango, ka chuani ya chukka, malmaya ka manakdo marampangi, kunga yunmi, nununga de bulo merengi yana, ngana pilingo jukka wo, pilingana pilingo jukka, kolko marimi, ngana po merengi yin, yana, jango balayul way of learning process, jango, ngana pilingo, kolko marimi jukka ngana puyakan merengi yin. Kinala yan nunungaro merengi, nunungaro communication go nyako merengi, angayangaro merengi nungo. Pili nunu ya kawarat tun banya ngana pilingong, ka nunungaro djämaw nganyana, panya na malanyana pilingong, kariyunda, kuyanginyi, tawatun ya kayan, kungan ya kayoto wo. Merengi yuman ya kayotoy, manu mangaro yuwal kena gunga yun ngana piling go yumur ko wo, kaya ngaro yuwal merengi, kaya ngaro yuwal kwaraton. Ka living in the environment that is ngal malengo bukmako, all to share, to learn together. Bukmak yana nunu Balanda, angana po yolngo, ejango. Kajamam nan, alengaro nyi nam, kajamam, Räl-manapanmirr rambangin. And this
Anything you want to say?
My movement finishing off.
Ma, yeah, I think so. We wanted to emphasize that everything has a pathway and dukkar. And we think and hope that our research is useful for other people that are trying to co-construct new shared understandings and find ways for Räl-manapanmirr, 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 which is collaboration, understanding, and connecting. So yeah, thanks for listening and interested to hear
you.
your questions.
Thank you so much, Emily and Rachel. That was a wonderful session. So many insights from your work, Emily, and you have learned so much. And we have a few minutes to take questions. If you want to ask a question, you can just unmute and go for it. Any questions from our audience? Or any contribution? Yes, Sue.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and I'd just like to say that that was a really beautiful explanation of an extraordinarily complex way of working in the world, and you both managed to distill really, really complex sort of research methodology into a nice simple story, but behind it, I'm sure that there was many, many times when you were struggling to understand each other, struggling to make sure that you were, you know, on the right track. And I think what you've provided for us and our team and the people that will listen to this going forward is some beautiful ways of actually making sure you are on the right track. And the other comment I'd like to make is to just say you've really outlined the importance of taking the time to do it properly, which of course we don't often have written into the research grants, the research timelines, the protocols and things like that. So do you have any comments on that, sort of trying to actually get the Ballender system to work in with the Yolnu system? It sounds like you both worked it really well, but what is it something that you still find difficult today, I suppose, is my question, or do you feel as though you've cracked it and you know how to do it going forward?
For myself, working in language area, the challenges are on always the funding part of it and the reporting. So that's always a challenge. So trying to sort of respect your ways and having to, because not doing any djämaw work is doing djämaw, and that perspective is not seen the same way. So when we are sitting together not doing anything, we are actually working. So that is one way to look at work when there is no work being done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're always continually getting challenged on that area. And I think what I've learned is it's really about trying to keep our relationship strong and having people to support us, because there's people, I'm looking at the screen of all of you, and there's a few people here that I know support me, which is wonderful. And it's so important for everyone, no matter how experienced we are, to be able to have people where we feel safe to come back to that shared space that Dikul talked about and reflect together and work through the issues, rather than like making assumptions and trying to figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah, that's why you always say working within a Kurutu framework. Kurutu means having the support of the people around you to make the research project good.
That's collaborative problem solving. And then remember, Gapang also told us about when there's a blockage in our water flowing, we need to work together to dig down and find out what's actually blocking it, so that we can fix that, rather than assuming that we know and trying to go down a pathway by ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, but yes, it's ongoing challenges, and it's all about the relationships, I think.
Thank you. We have time for just like one question. Vicky wants to know, what's the biggest mistake that Balanda make when working with Yono? If there's one thing you can talk about, what's the biggest mistake?
One is not having the time.
And that's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry, I stole you. But you go. There you go. Yeah, so that's one. And also listening. What type of listening we have here in the city does not work in the community. So we need to switch the way we listen in the community, because that's a different kind of listening that we need to practice. So hearing is an important part of working with Yormo to understand fully of what they are trying to tell us for the research.
Well, I would say too, rushing, and you mentioned before that not doing anything is doing something, but that waiting is such a valuable time for observing and learning and listening. And when we're rushing, we're often consumed by our own like agendas and stresses, and then you're not portraying who you want to be or who you are to the people around you. So that showing who you are is not just what you say, but it's how you like present yourself in the community and how you relate to people and how the feeling that you give people. So yeah, I think being mindful of that and not just what's on your list for the day.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you so much, Rachel, for making time to be with us today. And thank you to the people who joined us online also. This
Some people in
seminar has
Gullywinkle. There's people in Gullywinkle. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see.
this seminar is recorded, and so the recording will be available, and yeah, you can watch it at any time. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you all in July. Thank you.
Please get in touch with us if you want to talk more. And Sandra.
Yo, hello, it's good to see you all the way from Gullywinkle.
Yo. Hello. Yo, hello.
Ma, Jojo.
Good night.
Good night, baby. Good